The lawyer slid a single document across the conference table, and the room went completely silent. My brother Marcus had been talking non-stop for the last 20 minutes, about his plans for the house, about the business accounts, about how he had already picked out which furniture he was keeping. He had brought his wife. He had brought a notepad. He had, I kid you not, brought a tape measure. And then he read the first line of that document, and every single word died in his throat. But to understand why that moment felt like the most satisfying thing I have ever witnessed in my life, we need to go back about 4 years. Back to when my father was still alive, back to when our family still pretended to be one, and back to the moment I first saw the thing that would eventually cost my brother everything he thought he was guaranteed. My name is Daniel. I am the younger of 2 sons. And for as long as I can remember, that fact alone was enough for Marcus to treat me like a background character in a story that was entirely about him. Our father, Robert, built a construction and property management business from nothing. He started with a single rented truck and a willingness to work 16-hour days, and over 30 years he turned that into a company worth just over $2 million, a family home that had been in our family since Marcus and I were in primary school, and 2 rental properties that generated steady income every single month. He was not a perfect man. He was stubborn, emotionally private, and he had a habit of showing love through actions rather than words. But he worked hard, he was honest, and he loved both of his sons, even if Marcus had convinced himself otherwise. The problem was Marcus had also convinced himself of something else. He had decided, somewhere along the way, that all of it was already his. The business. The house. The rental income. All of it. He talked about it the way you talk about a bank account you already own. Not if Dad leaves me the business, always when I take over the business. Not I hope Dad considers me for the house, always when I move into the house. He spoke about our father's assets in the possessive tense before our father had even written a word of a will. And here is the specific thing about Marcus that you need to understand, the thing that will make everything that follows make complete sense. Marcus did not just believe he deserved more. Marcus believed that the act of believing he deserved more was itself a form of contribution. He thought his confidence in his own inheritance was equivalent to having earned it. He had never once worked a full year in our father's business. He showed up occasionally, offered opinions loudly at family dinners, and then disappeared for months at a time. But because he was the eldest, and because he had the loudest voice in every room, he had apparently decided that was enough. I, on the other hand, had been working for my father's business part-time since I was 17. I managed 2 of the rental properties directly from the age of 23. I handled the tenant relationships, the maintenance contractors, the quarterly accounts. When my father's health started declining 3 years ago, I was the one who quietly stepped in to keep things running. I reorganized the filing systems, set up proper digital accounting software, and spent most of my weekends either at the office or at one of the properties dealing with whatever needed dealing with. I did not do it for the inheritance. I want to be completely clear about that. I did it because my father needed help and because I genuinely cared about the business he had spent his life building. Marcus, during that same period, called our father roughly once a fortnight. He visited maybe 4 times a year. And every single time he visited, he would find a way to make a comment that reminded me, and everyone else in the room, exactly where he thought I stood. At Christmas dinner, 3 years ago, my father mentioned that I had taken over the management of the second rental property. Marcus looked up from his plate with a smile that did not reach his eyes and said, "Good for Danny. Everyone needs a hobby." He laughed. His wife laughed. My father looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. I said nothing. I filed it away. At my father's 65th birthday, Marcus stood up to give a toast and spent 4 minutes talking about what a great man our father was and how he looked forward to carrying on his legacy. He looked at my father the whole time. He did not mention me once. Not once. I was sitting 3 feet away. I had spent the previous 6 weeks organizing the entire party, booking the venue, coordinating with relatives, and managing every single detail. Marcus showed up 40 minutes late and gave a speech about himself. And then there was the meeting. About 2.5 years ago, my father called us both to his house to discuss the future of the business. He was not well, his heart had been giving him trouble and his doctor had told him to start thinking about reducing his workload. He sat us both down at the kitchen table and said he wanted to talk about a transition plan. Marcus immediately opened a notebook he had brought with him, he had actually prepared notes, and began outlining how he envisioned taking over the operational side of the company. He had a whole structure laid out. His name at the top. Various responsibilities delegated downward. He talked for about 15 minutes without pausing. My father listened. When Marcus finally finished, my father looked at me and asked what I thought. Marcus turned to me with that same thin smile and said, "Danny, you can keep doing what you're doing. We'll always need someone to handle the admin." Admin. For years of managing properties, handling contractors, keeping the accounts clean, and being the person who actually answered the phone when something went wrong at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, and to Marcus, that was admin. I looked at my father. My father looked at me. And in that look, something passed between us that Marcus did not see because he had already gone back to his notebook. Looking back, I should have understood what that look meant right then. But at the time, I just let it go. I went home, I went back to work, and I told myself it did not matter what Marcus called it. The work was the work, and I was going to keep doing it. That was the red flag I walked right past. My father's health declined faster than any of us expected. By the following year he was in and out of hospital, and by the year after that it was clear that we were in the final stretch. I spent a lot of that time with him. We talked more in those last 18 months than we had in the previous decade combined. We talked about the business, about the properties, about what he had built and what he wanted to happen to it. We talked about Marcus. We talked about me. I am not going to pretend those conversations were not painful. My father had some hard things to say about his own choices, about the way he had allowed Marcus to dominate the family narrative for so long, about the times he had stayed quiet when he should have spoken up.
He was not a demonstrative man, but in those conversations he was more honest with me than he had ever been. He told me he saw what I had done for the business. He told me he was proud of me. He told me he wanted to make things right. I told him not to worry about it. I meant it. He passed away on a Tuesday morning in March, 14 months ago. I was with him. Marcus arrived about 2 hours later. The weeks after his death were exactly as complicated as you would expect. There was the funeral to organize, which I handled, with help from my closest friend, a woman named Priya who had known our family for years and who had watched the Marcus situation unfold with increasing disbelief. Priya was the person who said to me, about a week after the funeral, "Daniel, you need to talk to the solicitor before Marcus does." I told her I was sure it would be fine. She gave me a look that made very clear she did not share my confidence.
Priya was right. I should have listened immediately. But I was grieving, and I was tired, and I did not have the energy to think about legal strategy in the middle of burying my father. Marcus, to absolutely nobody's surprise, was not grieving in the same way. Within 10 days of the funeral he had already called the family solicitor, a man named Graham, twice. He had sent Graham an email outlining his understanding of the estate and asking when the will reading could be scheduled. He had also, according to Graham, who told me this later, after everything was resolved, mentioned in passing that he assumed he would be the primary beneficiary given his position as the eldest son and his long-standing involvement in the family business. His long-standing involvement. I had to read that phrase 3 times. I finally called Graham myself about 2 weeks after the funeral. He told me the will reading was scheduled for the following month and that I should come prepared. I asked him what that meant. He said, carefully, that my father had been very specific in his final instructions and that the meeting would be an important one. He did not say anything more than that. But something in the way he said it made me sit up a little straighter. I spent the next 4 weeks doing something I had been putting off for a long time. I gathered everything. Every document, every record, every piece of evidence of the work I had done for that business over the past 4 years. I printed the digital accounts I had set up and maintained. I pulled together the contractor invoices I had personally managed. I compiled the rental income records, the tenant communication logs, the maintenance schedules. I created a clear, organized timeline of my contributions to the business, not to be dramatic, not to make a scene, just because I wanted to be prepared and because Priya had told me, very firmly, "You have proof, Daniel. Make sure you bring it." I also found something else. Something I had not gone looking for, but which was sitting in my father's home office in a plain manila folder labeled with my name. It was a letter. Handwritten. Dated about 8 months before my father died. I am not going to read you the whole thing. Some of it is private. But the relevant part, the part that made my hands shake when I read it, was this: my father had written out, in his own words, exactly what he had observed over the previous 4 years. He described what Marcus had and had not contributed to the business. He described what I had contributed. He described specific conversations, specific moments, specific decisions. And at the bottom, in the same careful handwriting, he had signed it and had it witnessed by 2 of his oldest friends. My father had known exactly what he was doing. I brought that letter to the will reading. I brought my folder of documents. I said nothing to Marcus beforehand. The day of the meeting, Marcus arrived looking like a man who had already won. He was dressed sharply. He had his wife with him, which Graham had not specifically invited but had not explicitly prohibited. He had his notepad again. And yes, I promise you this is true, he had a tape measure clipped to his belt. I noticed it the moment he walked in. Priya noticed it too. She looked at me with an expression I will never forget for as long as I live. We sat down around Graham's conference table. Graham arranged his papers. Marcus leaned back in his chair with the easy confidence of a man who believes the meeting is a formality. He actually said, while we were waiting for Graham to begin, we should probably talk about the house first. I'm thinking we can sort out a fair arrangement for Danny to collect his personal belongings within the month. He did not look at me when he said it. He was checking his phone. I said nothing. I looked at Priya. She gave me the smallest nod. Graham cleared his throat and began. The will was thorough. My father had worked with Graham over the course of about a year to make sure everything was documented precisely and without ambiguity. Graham read it slowly, clearly, the way solicitors do when they want to make absolutely sure everyone in the room understands what they are hearing. The house went to me. The business, including full operational ownership and all associated assets, went to me. The first rental property went to me. The second rental property, the one I had been managing for 4 years, went to me. Marcus received a financial sum from a separate account my father had maintained, a meaningful amount, enough to be genuinely useful, along with some personal items and a piece of jewelry that had belonged to our grandmother that Marcus had expressed interest in years ago. He had not been cut out. My father was not cruel, and neither was the will. But everything Marcus had spent years assuming was already his, every asset he had mentally catalogued, every room he had already decided he was keeping, every business decision he had already planned to make, none of it was his. None of it. Marcus did not react immediately. That was the thing that surprised me most. I had expected an outburst. I had braced for it. Instead, there was silence. Real silence. The kind that fills a room completely. His wife had gone very still beside him. His notepad was open to a page that now meant nothing. The tape measure was still clipped to his belt. Graham finished reading. He set the document down. And then Marcus said, very quietly, there must be a mistake. Graham explained that there was no mistake. The will had been properly executed, witnessed, and filed. It was entirely legal and entirely clear. Marcus's voice got harder. He said our father could not have been in his right mind. He said he had been influenced, and here he looked directly at me for the first time since the meeting started. He said he wanted to contest the will. This is the moment I had prepared for. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction, exactly, or at least, not the petty kind. With the quiet confidence of someone who has done the work and knows what they are carrying. I reached into the folder I had brought and I slid the first document across the table toward Graham. It was the timeline of my contributions to the business, 4 years of records, dated and detailed. Graham reviewed it briefly and nodded. He had seen portions of it before. My father had provided him with supporting documentation when the will was being drawn up. Then I placed the handwritten letter on the table. I did not say anything. I just placed it there. Marcus looked at it. He looked at the handwriting, our father's handwriting, unmistakable to both of us from a lifetime of birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. His face changed in a way I cannot fully describe. It was not just shock. It was the specific, particular shock of someone who has spent years constructing a version of reality that has just been disassembled in front of them, piece by piece, in a room they cannot leave. Graham confirmed the letter was part of the official estate documentation. Witnessed. Dated. Legally sound. Nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Marcus's wife put her hand on his arm. He did not seem to notice. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice was different. The easy confidence was gone. He said, he never told me any of this. And I believed him. I think that was true. I think my father had never told Marcus directly what he observed, what he valued, what he had decided. That was my father's way, he showed love through action, not words. The will was the most direct thing he had ever said to either of us. Marcus attempted to contest the will over the following 2 months. He hired a solicitor. They looked for grounds, undue influence, lack of testamentary capacity, procedural errors. They found nothing. My father had been careful. Graham had been thorough. The letter was airtight. The witnesses were credible. The timeline of my contributions was documented and verifiable. The contest was dropped. In the months that followed, I took full ownership of the business and the properties. I kept the same contractors my father had trusted. I kept the same approach he had built the company on: honest work, fair pricing, reliable service. The business did not fall apart. If anything, the transition was smoother than it might have been under different circumstances, because I had been quietly managing most of it for years already. The handover was, in many ways, a formality. Marcus and I have not spoken since the day of the will reading. I have not sought that silence as a punishment. I left the door open. I told him through a mutual relative that I had no interest in being enemies, that our father would not have wanted that, and that if he ever wanted to have an honest conversation, I was willing to have it. He has not taken me up on that. I understand. It is hard to face someone when you know exactly what you said to them over the years, all the small dismissals, all the thin smiles, all the casual ways you told someone their work did not matter, and you now have to live with the knowledge that someone else was watching, and recording, and quietly deciding. Priya asked me, a few weeks after it was all settled, whether I felt bad for him. I sat with that question for a while before I answered. I said I felt sad about it in the way you feel sad when something breaks that did not have to break. Marcus was not born entitled. At some point he made choices, to show up less, to contribute less, to dismiss more, and those choices accumulated into the outcome he received. My father did not punish him. My father simply told the truth. The will was not a weapon. It was a record. I still have that letter. I keep it in the same manila folder my father left it in. I do not read it often. But on the days when the business is difficult, when something goes wrong or a decision feels heavy, I sometimes take it out and read just the last paragraph. The one where my father, a man who struggled his whole life to say things out loud, finally wrote down what he should have said to me in person years earlier. I will not share those exact words here. They belong to me. But I will tell you this, by the time I finished reading that letter for the first time, sitting in my father's home office with the door closed and the house quiet, I understood something I had not fully understood before. The work had always been enough. The work had always been seen. I just had not known it until that moment. So here is the question I keep coming back to, and I want to know what you think. My father built something from nothing. He watched both of his sons, and he made a decision based on what he saw. He did not make that decision out of spite or favoritism, he made it based on decades of observation. Marcus received a financial sum that many people would be genuinely grateful for. He was not left with nothing. But he lost the things he had always assumed were his. The quarterly review meeting happened 6 weeks before everything finally broke open. Marcus had called it his phrasing, his invitation, though it was my office, my accounts software, my printed reports stacked at each seat. He arrived 8 minutes late, poured himself a coffee without acknowledging that I had already set one out for him, and sat down at the head of the table. Not his chair. There is no designated seating in that office. He simply chose the head and arranged himself there like it was obvious. I let it go. I had become expert at letting things go. We were 20 minutes into reviewing the contractor renewal schedules when Marcus interrupted a sentence I had not finished and turned to Graham's junior associate, who had joined us to discuss the business valuation update. Marcus gestured at the spreadsheet I had built and said, pleasantly, as though he were paying a compliment, "Danny's very good at the organizational side of things. Keeping everything tidy. It's a useful skill." He smiled at the associate. "Some people are builders and some people are administrators. You need both." My hands went still on the table. I did not move them. I did not look at Marcus. I looked at the spreadsheet I had spent 11 hours building over 3 evenings, the one that contained 4 years of contractor relationships I had personally cultivated, performance records I had tracked, renewal terms I had negotiated down by a combined total of just over $40,000 across the portfolio. And I heard the word administrator, and I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, not exactly. Something colder and more patient than anger. The kind of feeling that does not need to express itself because it has already decided what it is going to do. The associate nodded politely and wrote something down. Marcus moved on to the next agenda item. He had written his own agenda. He had not sent it to me beforehand. I sat there with my still hands and I thought, file it away. And I did. I went to see Priya that same evening. She lived 20 minutes from the office, in a flat above a dry cleaning business that always smelled faintly of warm fabric and chemical lavender, and she had a habit of making tea without asking whether you wanted any, which I had always found one of the most quietly generous things a person could do. By the time I had taken my coat off and sat down at her kitchen table, there was already a cup in front of me. I told her about the meeting. About the head of the table, the coffee, the associate, the word administrator delivered with that particular warmth that is somehow worse than open contempt. Priya listened without interrupting, which was another thing I had always valued about her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, turning her own cup in slow circles on the table. Then she said, "I need to tell you something I probably should have told you sooner. I wasn't sure it was my place." I looked at her. She set the cup down. "About 2 years ago, maybe a little more, it was before your father's health got really bad, Marcus came to see me. He didn't call first, just turned up at the shop on a Tuesday afternoon." Priya ran a small interior design consultancy from a studio space she rented nearby. "He wanted to talk about the business. About what he called the succession question. She paused. He asked me whether I thought you were genuinely capable of running it. Not managing properties. Running it. Strategy, growth, the financial side. My stomach tightened. He framed it as concern. She said. He was very measured about it. He said he worried that you were comfortable in a supporting role but that you might struggle with real responsibility. He said he thought it would be unfair to put that pressure on you. She looked at me directly. He wanted me to agree with him. I think he was building a case, even then. Collecting opinions. I did not say anything for a moment. What did you say? I told him I thought you were the most capable person I knew, and that the only thing I had ever seen hold you back was the amount of space he took up in every room. She picked up her cup again. He left quite quickly after that. I sat with it. 2 years ago. Before the final decline, before the will conversations, before any of it was urgent. Marcus had been making his preparations long before I had started making mine. He had not just been assuming. He had been actively constructing. Collecting allies, or trying to. Building a narrative in which I was competent but limited, useful, but not a leader. The kind of brother you keep on staff. There's something else. Priya said. He mentioned your father. He said your father had always struggled to see you clearly because he was too close to you. That the closeness made him overestimate you. The kitchen was very quiet. He said that to you. I said. He said that to me. She confirmed. I'm telling you now because when you go into that room with Graham, if Marcus makes any argument about influence, about your father being led or manipulated, that is the argument he has been building for 2 years. He has probably said it to other people. He has been laying groundwork. She looked at me steadily. Which means your documentation matters more than you know. Your father's letter matters more than you know. Because Marcus is not going to walk in there and simply be shocked. He is going to walk in there with a strategy. I drove home slowly that night. I sat in my car outside my flat for a long time before I went in. When I finally did, I went straight to the folder on my desk, the one with the records, the accounts, the timeline, and I added 3 more pages of notes. Dates, instances, decisions. Everything I could remember that I had not yet written down. I was not angry. I was ready. The night before the will reading, I could not sleep. I lay on top of the covers fully dressed until about 2 in the morning, and then I got up and sat at the kitchen table in the dark with the folder in front of me and the letter on top of it. I did not open the letter. I already knew what it said. I thought about the tape measure. I know that sounds absurd, of all the things to think about the night before something this significant, the tape measure. But I kept coming back to it. The fact that he had brought it. The fact that he had clipped it to his belt that morning, chosen it deliberately from wherever he kept his tools, and carried it into a solicitor's office for a will reading. What does a person have to believe about themselves to do that? What does the world have to look like from inside their head? I thought about my father at 65, raising a toast glass at a party he had not organized, listening to his eldest son talk about legacy for 4 minutes without once saying the other son's name. I thought about the word administrator. I thought about 2 years of Marcus sitting across from people, building his case, describing me as someone who struggled with real responsibility, collecting quiet agreements from anyone who would give them. Here is what I know. I know exactly what I did and did not do. I know the Sunday nights I spent on the phone with a tenant whose boiler had failed in January. I know the contractor I drove 40 minutes to meet at 7 in the morning because he had a narrow window and the work needed doing. I know the spreadsheet. I know the accounts. I know the filing system I built from scratch in a single weekend because the existing one was unusable and my father was too exhausted to fix it himself. Nobody asked me to do any of that. Nobody told me to. I did it because the work needed doing and because I was there and because I cared. That is the thing Marcus never understood. He thought caring was a strategy. He thought I was performing loyalty in order to secure a reward. He could not conceive of doing the work simply because the work was there and it mattered. To him, everything was positioning. Every action was a move. Which is why, I think, he never actually moved. He was so busy positioning that he forgot to do anything. I sat at that table until the sky outside the kitchen window went from black to gray to the particular thin blue of very early morning. I thought about my father's handwriting. I thought about Priya's face when she told me what Marcus had said, and the steadiness in her voice when she said your father's letter matters more than you know. I thought about what it means to be seen. Not praised. Not rewarded. Just seen. Accurately. By someone who was paying attention. By someone who, even though he found it hard to say things out loud, found a way to say it clearly in the end. I picked up the folder. I checked that the letter was on top. I squared the edges against the table until everything was aligned. Tomorrow, I decided, was just the day the record became official. I had been writing it for years. The lesson I took from all of it is this: people who count on your silence to protect their lies are always shocked when you stop being silent. Was I wrong to do what I did, or did they get exactly what they earned? Let me know in the comments. Was my father's will too harsh? Was I wrong to bring that letter and those documents to the table when Marcus threatened to contest it? Or did Marcus, through years of small dismissals, confident assumptions, and tape measures he brought to a will reading, get exactly the outcome he had been building toward his entire adult life? Tell me what you think. I read every single comment.